Is hiring a landscaper in Vancouver expensive? Yes, if it's done wrong. But here's the part most people don't think about. The real cost is not the price you pay up front, it's what happens after. Plants that don't last, soil that wasn't prepared properly, work that looks good for a few weeks, then slowly falls apart, and suddenly you're paying again to fix what should have been done right the first time. Because landscaping isn't just about putting things in place, it's about understanding the space, the soil, the conditions here in Vancouver. So the question isn't, is it expensive? Is it done with the right knowledge? This is what I see all the time. People are trying to save money, and that makes sense. So they hire cheaper labor, or they decide to do it themselves, watch a few YouTube videos, follow what they see online. And honestly, there's a lot of good content out there. Some of it is very helpful, but here's the part most people don't realize. Some of that advice was never meant for Vancouver. Different climate, different soil, different conditions. What works in California with dry, fast-draining soil doesn't behave the same way here. What works in the UK with mild winters doesn't always translate either. Because here, we're dealing with heavy clay, soil that holds water, long wet winters, and a spring that looks warm but the ground is still cold underneath. Now combine that with cheap labor that may not have deep knowledge of gardening, and those things matter more than people think. Because gardening is not just physical work, it's not just digging, planting, and watering, and what you get is something that looks right at the beginning. Plants go in, everything is neat, fresh soil, clean layout, and for a moment it feels like it worked. But then a few weeks pass, plants stop responding, some turn yellow, some slowly decline, others grow, but out of balance, and the space, even though everything is technically there, just doesn't feel right. And that's the frustrating part, because you follow the steps, you put in effort, you spent the money, but the result doesn't match what you imagine. So what do most people do? They try to fix it, add more plants, change things again, but that usually makes it worse, because the problem was never about how much you added, it was the foundation was never understood properly. And that's a real cost. Not the price you pay at the beginning, but everything you have to fix after. Because in the end, you're not just paying for labor, you're paying for knowledge of this place, this soil, this climate, because without that, even good advice and good effort can still lead to the wrong results. Let me show you what I mean. This is an example of a bad planting. I mean, people, they love maple trees, they want a maple in their front yard, and they'll do anything to get a maple in their yard. And you put a maple like this in front of this property, right underneath this huge cedar tree. And what's happening? The whole top of it died off. The maple tree is starting to push its way out because it wants light. So a bad spot for it. And then you got a paper bark maple right here. Again, another one. Paper bark maples grow 20 foot tall, 20 foot wide, and you stick this maple tree underneath these giant conifers, and you can see the top of the maple tree is already dying off because there's no sunlight. And it's such a bad spot to plant a maple tree. And then, like that beautiful maple tree or paper bark maple is going to end up dying in 10 years because there's no light for it. Another example, a maple tree, a bloodgood maple tree. These grow 15 foot by 15 foot wide, and you stick it right up against the conifer. And so what do? You either fight and you trim back the whole one side of that conifer tree, the evergreen tree, which weakens the one side of the evergreen tree, just to get more light for your maple tree. So you're basically weakening one tree to basically get light for your other tree, other than working with species that, different trees that can, stay in smaller spaces. Yeah, I mean, like this is the star magnolia. These ones grow still up to like 12 foot tall, 12 foot wide. Like here, there's no competition. The deciduous tree will stay narrow, but again, eventually these will grow into each other. And then you got this weeping maple at the bottom, which this whole side is always going to be trimmed off. And eventually it's just going to look like a round blob because it's too close to the sidewalk. Now watch this closely, because this is where things usually go wrong. When a plant is placed in the wrong location, it doesn't matter how much you water it or how good the soil looks, it will never really thrive. You might see a bit of growth at first, But over time, it starts to struggle. Too much shade or too much sun, too wet or not enough drainage. And the plant is constantly trying to adjust instead of growing properly. So instead of asking what's wrong with the plant, the better question is this the right place for it? Because once the placement is right, everything else becomes much easier. And this is where it becomes expensive. Not because of the price you paid at the start, but because of what happens after. You have to redo things, pull plants out, replace soil, rework areas that didn't settle properly, and that takes more time, more money, more effort. But the bigger cost is something people don't talk about. You lose a full season. Spring comes, everything should feel fresh, alive, something you look forward to, but instead of enjoying your space, you're fixing it. Trying to figure out what went wrong, moving things again, starting over, and that changes how you feel about the garden. It stops being something you enjoy and becomes something you have to deal with. And that's when people step away, not because they don't care, but because it feels too frustrating. And all of that usually comes from one thing, the wrong decisions at the beginning. Because when the setup isn't right, everything after becomes harder. And that's a real cost. Not what you spend first, but what you lose over time. Anyone can dig, anyone can plant, anyone can make a garden look good for a day, but that's not what makes it work. Because plants don't respond to effort, they respond to understanding the soil, drainage, light, timing, and how all of those things come together in a place like Vancouver. So it's not really about hiring someone, it's about hiring someone who understands what the plant needs before it ever goes into the ground. Because when the part is right, everything else becomes easier. And the garden doesn't just look good, it actually lasts. When I first got into landscaping, it was at the time where I knew all my where I started learning all my plant names, and my boss had me come in and do all the planting, and the homeowner came to my boss and said, okay, I'm gonna question this guy on every single plant that comes into my yard to see if your employee knows what he's talking about. And when the truck showed up, I remember going up to the back of the truck and opening the truck up, and every single plant that came off that truck, I named everything off, and I told her every species that was on the truck there, and she was very impressed by my knowledge and and the fact that I knew every single name of every plant that came out. And she went up to my boss and said, the one thing I'll tell you right away is do not let this guy leave your business. Because she said, there's not a lot of people that know their plants or their names, never mind knowing how to take care of the plant. And a lot of these, landscapers, they're there to dig holes, put plants in there and make a paycheck. But there's not a lot of people that actually really want to put any knowledge into knowing the different names of all the different plants. So it's good to know your plant species and good to know the names and everything, and not just knowing where the plant goes in the yard and how to take care of it. Hummingbird. But yeah, you should always know the different names too of all your plants, and not just where they go. So is landscaping expensive? Yes, it can be if it's done wrong. If the soil isn't prepared properly, if plants are put in the wrong place, if decisions are made without understanding the space, then what you pay at the beginning is just the start. Because you'll pay again to fix it, to replace plants, to redo what didn't last. But when it's done properly, the whole experience changes. You're not redoing things that went wrong. You're not constantly adjusting. Instead, the garden settles. It grows the way it's supposed to. It becomes easier to manage over time, and that's where you actually save. You save time because you're not starting over. You save money because you're not replacing plants again and again. And you save yourself from frustration because the space finally works. So the real question isn't, is landscaping expensive? It's, is it done the right way from the start? And maybe you've experienced this before. You've tried, you've spent money, you put time into the garden, and for a while it looks like it's working, but then something feels off. Not completely wrong, just not right. The plants are there, the space is filled, but it doesn't feel settled. It doesn't feel easy. You walk through it and you're not sure what needs to change, so you leave it. Or you start changing things again. And that cycle keeps repeating, not because you're doing something wrong, but because something important is missing. Clarity. Understanding how your space actually works. Because once you see that, everything starts to make more sense. And the garden finally begins to feel right. Before you redo everything, take a moment to understand what's actually going on or going wrong. If something in your garden isn't working right now, don't rush to replace everything. Don't assume you need more plants, more soil, more changes, because most of the time the issue isn't how much you've done, it's understanding what's underneath it. So tell me, what are you dealing with right now? Are your plants not growing the way you expected? Does the layout feel off? Or is it just too much work to keep up with? Drop it in the comments, keep it simple. I'll go through them, help you figure out what's really happening in your space. Not just what to change, but why it's happening in the first place. So before you spend more money or start over again, you have clarity, you have direction, and that's what makes the biggest differences. I'm Darrell, and I'll see you in the garden.